increasingly cinematic, yet increasingly generic. These visual art pieces captivate our households. They take over coffee break conversations, assuming you're not working remotely, and are seemingly able to break viewership numbers every other week. No, it's not TikTok, you dummy, it's TV shows. And I hate to break this to you, but they're fucking broken, man. Specifically mysteries. But what do I mean by that? Well, luckily for you, I've written this whole script about it, including this message from our sponsor. Alpaca Thunder Productions. Feel the difference. Get up, get set, and get going, as this handcrafted thumbs up and ethically sourced subscribe button are guaranteed to bring a pep to your step. Join us and start off your day with a fresh alpaca brew. From one alpaca thunder to another. Cheers, and drink responsibly.
This message has been approved for safe consumption by the Syndicate of Laughing Llamas.
Bringing it back to the topic at hand, the problem with TV mystery. And when I say that, I'm referring to any show that, well, has a mystery, usually revolving around a single event, and through various narrative techniques, the showrunners will feed us the truth. This isn't always the case, especially if there are multiple seasons, but I digress. In mysteries, this is often labeled as the turning point, the trigger that leads to the climax. Shit's about to go down, and of course, this is by design. Remember how at the start of the series we are shown an incomplete version of the mysterious event? Well, its function is what we call the inciting incident, the event that sets the story in motion. And when the premise is built around the mystery, it's logical to have the structure of the plot follow suit. It's symmetrical, it's beautiful, it works, until it doesn't. And that's what we're going to discuss today. Specifically, why recent TV shows have been stumbling when attempting to circumvent that tricky reveal. Because, if you haven't noticed it already, revealing a mystery is often just around the block from becoming an exposition dump. And fuck those neighbors. Lastly, we're gonna go from best to worst, but it's important to note that this doesn't reflect my overall opinions on the show's quality. I'm strictly basing this on the manner they handled their mysteries. Spoilers are imminent. The Chestnut Man, a Danish crime series and a rather mighty fine watch. And this story revolves around a string of strange murders that are seemingly tied to a girl's disappearance a year earlier.
Well, let's get into this murder. I'm hoping it's a dope one.
What's the connection? Well, none other than the Chestnut Man.
The Chestnut Man?
Who lives on Drury Lane?
Yes, the Chestnut Man, and the missing girl's fingerprint to boot.
Captain, I hope you're wearing your evaluating pants because I'm about to put on a crime-solving clinic.
Now, it's important to note that this series doesn't have a singular specific event. Instead, its mystery hinges on a series of incidents that transpired in the past, and how they may connect with the current murders. And so, throughout its 6 episodes, we are given a steady drip of information, either through newly discovered evidence, conversations, witness interviews, or flashbacks from a suppressed memory. Ooh. We'll leave it as that to avoid any major spoilers, but what is happening here is a creative choice that allows the show to avoid those long-winded explanations. The villain of this nicely crafted story does go on to divulge his modus operandi, but this only happens after we've entered the climax and not before it. In other words, it's not the trigger. And this distinction becomes more apparent as we go on to The Silent Sea, a South Korean sci-fi mystery about expendable astronauts tasked with retrieving a secret sample from an abandoned lunar base. But these unlucky cats quickly find themselves asking, what? Through 6 episodes, it does a good enough job at unraveling the mystery. That is, until you get to episode 7, when things slow down during its first 20 minutes to allow for a self-inflicted exposition dump. Not only that, this happens before we reach the story's climax. Picture, if you will, a picturesque scene. You're merging into the highway, window down, hands stretched out. The tunes are playing, the wind is blowing, and you're ready to take a cruise. Only to find there's a construction zone waiting for you. It's frustrating, and it doesn't help when the 8th and final episode continues to churn out flashbacks to the point where you may start yelling out, I don't care. It has all the same ingredients as the Chestnut Man, but none of the finesse. In other words, unlike Chestnut Man that allowed its mystery to organically unravel throughout the entirety of its narrative, Silent Sea meanders, resulting in an uneven distribution. It likely would have benefited from having less episodes, thus a tighter narrative package. At least it tries, and while the show is mediocre at best, the exposition dump that occurs is short enough to warrant a passable grade. It's bearable, unlike our next subject, Archive 81. This one hurts, because the series really does a good job on unraveling the mystery through its narrative. In fact, the story premise introduces a rather clever mechanic to lead us down a rabbit hole. And lead us it does, as Archive 81 tells the story of Melody Pendrus and her tapes, the only surviving bits of evidence from the Visser apartment fire. Oh my. Luckily, they have Daniel Turner, a conservator, to restore the damaged tapes. But things aren't as they seem, as Dan is taken through a time-bending soiree that will grip you to the end. That is, until you make it to episode 7, which also happens to be the penultimate episode. I think there's a theme happening here. On top of that, just like in the Silent Sea, this turn of exposition happens before the climax and thus before the trigger. But it doesn't end there, because you get to circumvent a 45-ish minute long episode dedicated to explain to you why any of this matters. It's a frustrating sequence I feel the series never recovers from, in a bittersweet way to end an otherwise well-crafted mystery. It can't get much worse, right? Right? The Haunting of Bly Manor, and to a much lesser extent, The Haunting of Hill House, are guilty of the aforementioned exposition dump. Before we continue though, both seasons were generally liked, particularly Hill House, which I personally loved, but this doesn't change the fact that both dedicated the penultimate episodes to unraveling the mysteries of their hauntings. Hill House was less affected by this because of the way it used flashbacks throughout its season. However, it was never able to fully recover from its heights of episodes 7 and 8, thus leading to its lukewarm ending. Now, it is admittedly incredibly hard to maintain this tension once you reveal your monster. It's a hurdle found in all forms of media dealing with this genre, but I can also argue that showing less is better, and Hill House definitely opted to show more. Bly Manor, on the other hand, takes this to a whole new level, as its penultimate episode is just straight up a history lesson on its past. Admittedly, it does make a bit of sense considering how the entire season is being narrated, but if someone telling you a scary story decided to diverge just before the climax to go on an hour-long tangent about the ghost's feelings... So, why is this happening? Well, while a TV show can provide cinematic-like experiences, often with a lot more detail due to that longer runtime, they are still governed by the same rules as their silver screen counterparts. A narrative is typically broken down into a 3 or 4 act structure. The key, however, is in the movie's brevity, as it doesn't have the luxury, or in this case, the burden, of an elongated runtime. The result then is a more hyper-focused plot that doesn't feel the need to meander, that doesn't feel the need to stuff us with hours and hours of detail. It's lean, it's mean, and it only requires a brief and less egregious expository mystery reveal, assuming it even chooses to reveal the mystery and not end the whole thing in ambiguity. Television, on the other hand, is forced to stretch out the plot. It meanders, it's bloated, and before you know it, it's funny. TV shows, in an attempt to be more like movies, became increasingly serialized, thus exposing them to pitfalls that weren't as prominent during their episodic days. You could sprinkle the season's narrative over a handful of seasons, and then just have fun with the remainder. Every week, a new monster, a new mystery, a new away mission. What I'm getting at is...
Delicious.
Star Trek: The Next Generation is clearly still the best that TV has to offer.
A warrior's choice.
Tell him he is a pretty cat. And a good cat.
Many joined us, hoping to find a new home. We could not escape the dangers. And your abuelo was lost.